Let's quickly have a look at our project. All of our source code is housed in the source directory. Getting into the main file, this sets up the Express application to use JSON parsing and a few other configuration options. If you're familiar with Express.js at all, this must look very familiar to you. If not, it's fairly easy to understand. This pulls in the HTTP routes that we've set up. Here, typically MVC CRUD applications have index routes to list the resource. In our case, it's the posts. So the index route here lists the resource. The create route creates a post. The show route shows a post by ID. The update route, or the patch call to /post/ID, updates a given post by its ID. And we have a delete post which deletes a post by its ID. You may have noticed a service, a call to a service. This app tries to mimic a real world situation, code bases that I have seen in my day-to-day work. A service is somewhat of a wrapper for wrapping all business logic that may go within the application itself. In a blog post application, it's fairly simple, especially in this one, but you may have rules around how a post is created, or if someone can access a post, any number of rules that can go in. And typically you'll see a services class or a services object in JavaScript that performs this action. In our case, the services class or service methods are actually delegating to a repository, the posts repository, and we'll get to that in a minute. The services class encapsulate all of that behind methods that the router will use or the controller will use to fetch data. So we have a method called all, which will fetch all of the posts, where we can limit it by the number of posts if passed through a query. The create service call creates a post, and so on and so forth. We'll see this as the project goes along. Going to the repository, a repository typically is used as an abstraction over database calls, if you see in most frameworks. But more simply speaking, repositories are meant to encapsulate or even abstract away sources of data, not necessarily the database. It could be in a microservices environment, it could be called to another service to fetch data, or it could be data from a cache. In our case, I've used it very simplistically because this example aims to be simple, and we have all methods to actually create, get, update, and delete a given post. I am using Connects in this project to talk to the database. I'm using PostgreSQL as my preferred database, and Connects is a great library that abstracts away the SQL queries that have to be written by hand and gives a nice query builder that we can work with. This is the configuration for Connects itself to run migrations and such. The database configuration is within the source database directory, where we establish the connection to our local database, which has been set up through Docker. And finally, we have the Docker compose file, which brings up our Postgres database that we can use from our API itself. I'm using .env to make environment configuration a lot easier instead of passing them through the command line.